welcome you all here this evening to the special council meeting on Monday, the 18th of November 2024. And the first thing on the agenda is apologies. And I have apologies from Garvin McPhillips and Bernard McGrath. And next I'm going to go to, and Councillor Gavin has sent an apology as well. So next, I don't see Debbie online. Maybe she is. So who'll I take the apology from Sinn Féin? All right. Okay. Councillor McElduff.
Right now, I haven't a clue what I'm doing, but I'm about to sort it out in my head.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's an apology from Debbie herself. I think she's lost her voice.
Is that you, Eva?
That's Anne-Marie there, Anne-Marie Fitzgerald. Catherine Kelly has sent apologies. Martin McCulgan has sent apologies. I'm aware of those two. Nolene Hayes has sent apologies. Okay, and Declan McCardle.
Okay. I see Debbie's online. If she has anything she wants to add to that. Well, I don't think she has a voice. No. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I just about have a voice. I just want to add Nolene to that as well, please.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Next we'll go to Councillor Victor Warrington online.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any apologies. I know some of our councillors is joining online. Thank you.
Thank you. Earl is somebody from. Oh, I see. Sorry, Earl. Paul's online. Paul, do you want to go ahead there?
No apologies, as far as I know now. Everybody should be online.
Okay, thank you. And Eddie's online, so you're happy enough, Stephen. And yeah, and I see Josephine online as well. Obviously, just to remind everybody, the house rules, if you're online and you wish to take part, your camera needs to be switched on. So we can verify.
I'm here, Chair.
Yeah, I see you, Alan. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for the apologies. Next, we go to declarations of interest. Councillor Anne-Marie Fitzgerald.
Yes, Chair. Thanks a lot, Paul. Welcome, Grania, and your team or whatever. Just, I'm declaring an interest that I'm a member of the Housing Council.
Okay, thank you, Anne-Marie.
Okay.
I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so I'm going to welcome Grania Long and her team, John McCartan, Helen Hicks and Sinead Collins in the room. And online we have Andy Kennedy, Mark Holliday, Conway. Mona, sorry, apologies, Mona, and Kevin Lees. So I think the easiest way is just to pass on to you, Grania.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, and I'll just share my screen. Let's hope it works. Apologies, everyone. Sorry. So my colleague Sinead had it all set up, and you know what they say, never give the chief executive a real job to do. So I'll leave it to the expert. Apologies, Sinead. Well done. Excellent. Well done. Thank you, Sinead. Good evening, members, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present. And this is our annual presentation of the Housing Executive's Housing Investment Plan. And what I'll do over the next 10 minutes or so is just to present to you on the scale of our investment, the nature of that investment last year, and then focus on the year to come. In other words, this year, and again, how much we will invest and where and the areas of investment, and then leaving time, obviously, for questions. If I just say at the outset, thank you to you, to members, and to officers across the council. Obviously, you're our community planning partners, and we are yours. And I think that like the amount of partnership that goes on between my organisation and yours, I think is really positive. I think what you'll see over the course of the next few slides is just what that means for people across the council and the district council in terms of, from our point of view, housing outcomes and services. But there's a whole range of areas where we're working together, and we're very grateful. And obviously, this is all focused on the place shaping, or the community plan for the area, and obviously then some of the work that we're doing, whether it's through the Enniskillen place shaping plan, or indeed a whole range of other areas, including a focus on health and health outcomes. I think you can see, as I say, over the course of this presentation, just the importance of that partnership. So thank you for that. Just, I suppose, at the outset to say and to remind everyone, the number of households across the council area, 45,714. And again, you can see the split there between owner occupation, so households who own their own home, the private rented sector, which is really quite large at 22% relative to other councils, and then social rented at 9%. But as I say, a large private rented sector in the area. And the housing executive itself, as a landlord, manages just over 3,500 homes. My colleague Helen is here, who you will all know, no doubt, Helen and her team locally, working very closely with council and with elected members. If I just start then by going through the total amount of spend, housing executive spend across the council area for 23-24, and you'll see that was just above 60 million. And I suppose worth noting a number of areas. First of all, just over 24 million on housing benefit, which remains a really, really important subsidy for households who need help with their rent, with their housing costs, whether that's in the private rented sector or in social housing. So just over 24 million. You'll also be very aware, I'm sure, through your own contacts and constituency contacts, the transfer to universal credit, which is a really important and critical transfer now that's happening for some households over the course of this year. The other area that I thought is absolutely worth mentioning is the very large level of investment in new build of just over 20 million. So that is really brilliant to see. And I think from our perspective, working with you as the planning authority, really, really good to see sites coming forward. Great to see a healthy pipeline of schemes and permissions granted for new build social housing, and that's why that number is so high. And we want to keep it that high. We want to keep a very strong focus locally on new build social housing, and working closely with you as the planning authority to do that. So delighted to see that number as high as it is, and as I say, want to keep that going strong. The other area to mention, because it's so critical, is the Supporting People programme. So just on the right-hand side of your screen, 4.98, so 5 million more or less, providing in supporting people. And that's the Housing Support Fund, which still exists in Northern Ireland. It's actually lost its protected nature in Scotland and Wales and England, but we still have it here, and I'm delighted to see just short of 5 million of spend, and that is delivered in partnership with the voluntary community sector locally, but that provides housing support services directly to people who need it, whether that's people with disabilities, whether it's older people, young people, and people who are experiencing homelessness. So I think without that we would see much higher levels of homelessness, much higher levels of acute need amongst households, as I say, with disabilities and older people. So this is all about keeping people in the community and being able to live healthy lives in their local community. So I won't go through all of that slide, but of course very happy to take questions on some of those other areas that I haven't touched on. Importantly then, if we move on to new build. So last year, as I said, really record investment of 20 million in new build. And so 140 new social homes under construction at the end of March this year, which we're delighted to see. I'll talk a little bit about the pipeline coming forward and what that looks like in the future. You'll see there Coolnagard Phase 2, and that's a choice scheme in Oma, just one of the schemes that were approved and are going ahead. As you know, the Housing Executive also has responsibility for Housing for All, which is shared housing that transferred from the Housing Executive, from the Department to the Housing Executive in the year just past. And that gives us the opportunity in a really strategic sense to push for shared housing and ensure that we have shared communities. So within the Fermanagh and Omagh District Council area, with 3 Housing for All schemes completed and 2 potential schemes at pre-allocation stage. So you'll see there Woodside Avenue, very close to here, which is on site, and that's a Harbour Housing Association scheme there. So really good to see that going forward. But I think the numbers speak for themselves in terms of the nature of housing need. And I was here last year and I remember presenting to you on the numbers going up. So we still see very high levels of housing need in March, just over 2,154 applicants on the waiting list in the council area and 1,512 in housing stress. So those are those households most in need. Yet despite those numbers being as high as they are, there were just over 210 allocations over the year just past. So, you know, when you have housing need that high, and yet new allocations are just over 210, and that shows, you know, the gap between demand and supply is really acute, and why that level of investment in new build social housing is so important. So over the next few years, we should see allocations to new build going up, given that level of investment, and we want to see that now reducing down the waiting list. But the only way to do that is to keep going and keep investing, which is why our new build programme is so important, and funding from the department for that new build programme is so important. So we have 2 roles, as you know, just worth reiterating. As the Strategic Housing Authority, our job is to undertake housing need assessments to understand the level of housing need, and not just the numbers, but also what the nature of that housing need is. So in other words, the split between urban and rural, the type of homes that are needed, whether they're homes for single households, whether they're homes for families with children, and everything in between. So if I start with the future housing requirements, so we've assessed that there are 905 new build homes needed over the next 5 years. 905. We can give the breakdown of that more locally, and that's available to you. And a healthy programme so far. So we have 285 of those already on the programme. And we will continue to see a good pipeline, I've no doubt, a good pipeline of schemes coming on stream over the next year or so. If we look back, and I think you have a very, very good story to tell as a council, which is great to see. We set a target over the last 5 years for Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, and that target was 146 starts, and that was split between 122 urban, 24 rural. And the very, very good news, which I'm delighted to see, is that 203 starts were achieved. So this is a council that has exceeded its new build housing target, and so you can see that the split between 180 urban and 23 rural, so really pleased to see. And I can say to you, not all councils are meeting those targets, so it's really good to see, and we want to see that continuing. So that's why that target now for the next 5 years is so important. So if I turn on then to projected spend for this year, and again, just to say to you, this is always an incomplete slide, because what we can't do is project, for example, the amount of housing benefit that we will spend this year, because it is demand led. So we don't include the housing benefit spend on that slide. We also don't include the investment in new build, because again, we have to wait until the end of the year to know what schemes we've approved. But other than that, what you will see is in terms of the landlord, a much bigger programme in terms of our planned maintenance and our stock improvements. So in terms of our own stock, so that's a doubling of our own investment in our stock, which again, I think is very good news locally. It's also very good news in terms of local economic growth. At a council level, you'll be obviously only too interested in that. So we will spend 7 million, just north of 7 million on our planned maintenance and stock improvements. We'll also continue to spend a significant sum, 2.5 million on response maintenance. So that's our work as a landlord, and on grounds maintenance as well. But then you'll see on the strategic side, Strategic Housing Authority side, 1.5 million in private sector grants, just over 5 million in supporting people, and 650,000 in affordable warmth. Now, we bid for a much bigger programme for affordable warmth and for grants generally. We didn't receive the funding that we had hoped for from the department, and that is no doubt having an impact, and may well be something we want to cover in questions. So just before I finish then, if I touch on some of the challenges locally, and then some of the opportunities, or some of the areas where I think there's an opportunity for growth. I think if I start just by touching on the issue of homelessness, which across all council areas, homelessness remains a significant challenge. We're still seeing the effects of COVID. Actually, the numbers of people who during the pandemic were living in unsuitable accommodation and had to seek temporary accommodation, and the numbers have trebled since the pandemic. The numbers of people across all 11 council areas living in temporary accommodation. We work very hard to ensure that temporary accommodation is suitable, it's of high quality and standard. More than 70% of our temporary accommodation is own front door, so it's flats, single lets as we would call them, and we have a target to not to place children in non-standard or hotel or bed and breakfast accommodation. Where we do, it's in extreme circumstances, and we want to keep the length of time as low as we possibly can. So that's a target that we continue to focus on, and we want to see those numbers as low as we possibly can. I think most of the other issues there I've touched on. So if I just finish on the issue of fuel poverty and energy efficiency, that's an area of real focus for us as a landlord. We'll invest, the Housing Executive as an organisation will invest more than 54 million this year in energy efficiency programmes, everything from thermal improvements to our own stock, retrofitting our stock. We have a programme of low carbon heating installations, and obviously our role as the Energy Conservation Authority, Home Energy Conservation Authority, is a very important one. So we continue to focus on that very strongly. We have a pilot of 6 new build homes. So the Housing Executive hasn't built properties itself in 25 years, but last year we received approval, or 2 years ago, approval to build 6 new build properties, and they're to Passive House standards. So they are low carbon homes using modern methods of construction. So 6 of those in Belfast. I'm very keen, and we're keen as an organisation, to roll that out so that we are building in all council areas, as you can well imagine. And so that's an area of real focus for us. But if I finish there, Chair, in the interest of questions, I'm very happy to take them, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Grania. And next we'll go to Councillor Barry McElduff.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the team for coming along tonight and having this engagement. This evening alone, I've been in conversation with people who are in dire straits when it comes to their housing situation. I don't want to make too specific a reference to them. I won't be referring to them by name, of course, but just dire circumstances, where one gentleman is completely homeless, not even couch surfing, none of that. And that is homeless, as is his situation, which is even worse. And another gentleman has been told with very serious illness that it'll be 20 months before an OT is able to assess his needs, adaptation needs. So as public representatives, we hear it all the time from people who are in stress. But this is a once-a-year opportunity to say key things. So I do want to thank Helen and Annette and the team for their responsiveness throughout the year. Whenever I make individual queries, there's a very good turnaround time, with information to be of help. So that's very positive. I suppose to try to keep it on the macro level, the strategic level. When can we expect the Housing Executive to build houses in our council area? It's great that housing associations with whom you work in partnership, such as Arbor and Choice, have a building programme right now. That's good. We're pleased about that. But the level of demand is serious. People are contacting me and saying, I have 170 points, but I don't think I'm going to get one of those houses. And that would be the answer to my problem. How do I get more than 170 points? So I suppose if I was to condense it into one question, it would be, looked on with envy at the pilot scheme in North Belfast, the 6 houses, Passive House standard, Housing Executive building again. So with the powers to do that, when can we expect the Housing Executive to be building again? I'm going to ask specifically about Omagh, but Omagh and the wider council area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McElduff, and thank you for the positive comments in relation to the team. I'm really pleased and not surprised, but really pleased to receive them. So thank you for that. Yes, I mean, I think, you know, when the waiting list figures are as high as they are because we collectively simply haven't built enough social housing. When I say we collectively, I mean over many, many years. As I said, the Housing Executive hasn't built homes for 25, 26 years and is very, very keen to do so. To answer your question as clearly as I can, the Minister for Communities, it will be a decision for a Minister and Ministers. The Minister for Communities, when he came into post, has reiterated his commitment to the previous Minister's intention that the Housing Executive should be able to borrow from its rental income, against its rental income, to invest in its homes and to build and to add to new supply. We were very pleased to be able to undertake the pilot, which was great, but that hasn't been delivered through a change in our powers. It will be a decision, first of all, I think, by Treasury, by UK Treasury, to enable us to borrow without that borrowing counting as Northern Ireland Executive debt. So it will be in the first instance decision by Treasury and then a decision by ministers in the Northern Ireland Executive. My understanding is those discussions are going well. They're going positively. I know our minister is absolutely committed. He spoke at our community conference only last month with a room full of Housing Executive tenants. And I thought what was very compelling in that room was, you know, there were tenants in the room and they were very keen to tell the minister that while they were pleased to be Housing Executive tenants, they wanted other people on the waiting list to be Housing Executive tenants. So he gave them, he was very clear in his language to them that he wants the revitalisation of the Housing Executive. He considers it a priority. As my understanding is, the discussions are ongoing, and I'm confident that, you know, those decisions will be made in a positive manner. But what I can't give you is a time frame, because that would be essentially that would be a matter for the minister. And what we are certainly doing is making sure that when that time comes, and I hope it will be in the next year or two, it's certainly in this mandate, that we are best foot forward and that we're ready to go. And so what we've been doing is looking at first of all, building our own capacity so that when we have borrowing powers, we're able to increase our investment. So we've been looking at, you know, through an improved approach to procurement, so we can scale up our investment in our homes. We've also been, including through the pilot in Sunningdale at Gardens in Belfast, and building our internal capacity so that we're ready to build, because we have to go from no homes at all in 26 years. We'll have to build a team, we'll have to build our capacity. So we're very keen, I'm very, very keen for that pilot in Sunningdale to be extended to other council areas. So we're currently looking at our land assets and what sites we would start with. So we want to be in the best possible position when the time comes. So I'm hoping in the next year or two we'll be in that position to do so. And in other words, the decision will be made.
To conclude, thank you. Forgive me for looking for new houses beside Sunningdale and Omagh. There's a Sunningdale and Omagh as well. But
or maybe that's the next place to start.
But I think there's a real opportunity in Omagh with the vacant or soon to be vacant sites. So that place shaping work should be taking place. I'm sure it is taking place, but would like to see evidence of maximum use of those or available sites in Omagh to meet the social and affordable housing need. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, next we go to Councillor Thomas O'Reilly.
Thank you, Chair. And you're very welcome, Grania, Helen, and all the team. And thank you for coming with such a strong team, both here and online, and recognising the worth of your interaction with local government. I think that's very positive in that sense. A few things I suppose I want to cover, Grania. You say that quite rightly that you haven't built in 25, 26 years, but you were largely about the sort of latent demand test to be facilitating the housing, what are they called? The who builds houses? The
housing associations, yeah.
Housing associations, that's the one. You were about that. So I would contend again, Grania, that there is something fundamentally flawed about the latent demand testing system, in that housing associations have not been building to the adequate numbers, and you quite clearly said it, that we're, and it's covered in the news today, we're at a 66-year low at having housing. So there's something there that needs to be, and I appreciate that's not directly your, but a part of it to look at how that can be dealt with. You mentioned as good to see that 6 passive houses, and I hope that that is the beginning of a rollout of a building program that is all going to be at passive house standard, because eat or heat should not be a contention in 25, 26 going forward. But can I say that it is a kind of ironic again that a pilot like that of 6 houses is Belfast centric again? You know, what about the agencies and departments of central government looking at rural areas? And I appreciate there's a lot of them. So while Barry may wish it in Sunningdale or wherever it is close to it, outside of Belfast is, and well outside of Belfast is, I would say, not before long in how we should maybe look at things. Can I mention the Affordable One home scheme? And it's good to see an increase there, and hopefully there will be a greater turnaround of people being able to get onto that list and actually avail of it. But I certainly was with one young person with a 3-month-old baby that desperately needs that Affordable One scheme and can't get on it because of just being over the income threshold sort of level. And we all know about what income buys you today and all the rest of it. So I'm not sure if there can be something done there about that income level or lobbying for that. While new build would certainly be very welcome, I'm sure, in any area, there's a lot of vacant sites that were half built and so forth. And there's a lot of vacant properties within towns and village centres, and I'm sure city centres, that is already there but lying vacant and are a real eyesore, and to bring down the image of a village. And I'm just wondering if there could be a focus on some funding there that could look at how you could bring some life back into town centres instead of having it as a ghost town after 6 o'clock. You mentioned that there was 3 schemes in the Fermanagh. I didn't quite hear Newtown Bay and the scheme by rural housing of the 6 units that was promised, I don't know how many years ago now. So for so long, we never got through the latent demand testing, and then got through it, and there's supposed to be these units coming, but a long time in the processing of that. So not to mention just a length of processing through the latent demand, but now we're sitting with, yes, units were to be built. No, they haven't been built in years. So I'm just wondering where that is. The other one that is, I suppose, the decision was made 3-4 years ago to remove the light columns from the back of a lot of housing estate housing, and that's happening at the moment. And people, like everything else, are only really perturbed about it when it's gone out in the dark and they're tripping over themselves in the dark. I'm just wondering, is there anything there to look at least monitoring that to see, are we getting a lot more claims in from people falling in pitch blackness in the back of their homes? Thank you, Grant.
Thank you for that. So in terms of housing need and our approach to housing need, and how you I suppose match need with delivery. So I suppose we have a really important role as an independent housing authority, which is that it is our job to measure housing need. And so what this document, what our commissioning prospectus, which is available on our website and is published every year and updated every year, demonstrate is that across all 11 council areas over the next 5 years, there is demonstrable housing need for 25, roughly speaking, 25,000 homes. Okay. So we have a very important role in setting that out, and it's a public document and being completely open about that. So there's nor should there be any hiding about that. So that's the number of social homes that we need to build. Alongside that, we then, and we make that available, I should say, to housing associations so that they can use that document. That really is their guide. And in terms of identifying sites in those areas of greatest housing needs so that we can support a future planning application. So that's the relationship between the housing need and then directing or guiding, I suppose, a better word, housing associations. Entirely separately from that is the budget. Okay, so while we're saying we collectively need to build 25,000 homes, what we have not had is a budget to build 25,000 homes over 5 years. And that would be a huge capital outlay. I think if I go back 2 years ago, generally speaking, 180 million, with 180 million, you could build about 2,000 homes. And that's, so that'll give you the sense of what 5,000 homes a year would be. So that's why it's not unusual to have a mismatch. It's not unique to Northern Ireland, where between here's the number of homes we need to build and here's the number of homes that are actually funded. And I suppose that's the difference. So that's, I suppose that's the answer to that. I suppose that the answer in relation to your question in Sunningdale, and in fact, as Anne-Marie mentioned, our Housing Council member, she'll remember only too well the discussions around the Housing Council on this issue as well. It was always going to be difficult. Whatever site we chose, somebody entirely understandably was going to say, well, why not here? And so we had we took a very clear process towards identifying the site. It was a pilot and we wanted to be able to move quickly because the department asked us to do this, and it was an opportunity and we haven't had it in a generation. So what we did was we looked at the available sites. We knew we would only have funding for a very small site. And so when we looked across all of our sites, small, easy to access sites, it's a corner site in North Belfast. There wasn't much by way of remediation costs, so it was pretty easy to get our start on site going, and so that's why that led to that particular site. Okay. However, we also have a very clear view of where we would go next, and while I've also presented to colleagues in Belfast, I have also said to them, I would not expect the second one to be in Belfast, but it will have to be housing need based, but it will also be site based. So as I say, kind of watch this space. We've been very clear to the department. We would love to do more, and so we'll be putting a bid in, as you would expect, to go further than that. On affordable warmth, again, we bid for that programme to be fully funded this year. We didn't receive that bid, so affordable warmth has been reduced. And we have had to prioritise the interventions within affordable warmth. It will be for the department to decide on income thresholds, and they will have to make decisions. And I know they fairly regularly review those income thresholds, so we can certainly feed that back, and there's no issue doing that. I'll come on to colleagues in relation to the specifics of individual sites, Sinead, in a moment. But just to say, I mean, we do have, in terms of vacant sites, the Housing Executive does have a very important role from a place shaping point of view. What we don't have, however, is a formal land assembly role. And so, I would strongly be of the view, from a public land for housing point of view, I think there's far more that we could do in partnership, public sector bodies working more closely together to bring sites forward. But Sinead, I might ask you just to come in on that point around, and that's either that specific site or place shaping generally, maybe Helen on the issue around lights and lighting. That's all right. Thank you.
Hello, Councillor O'Reilly. I was just going to make a point in relation to latent demand testing. I do see where you're coming from, but the sole purpose of a latent demand test is to identify need, to encourage people to come onto the waiting list where they haven't done before, where they haven't seen there's any point. Because without that evidence of need from the waiting list, we can't support our housing association partners and with the provision of new build housing. But we are starting to see that evidence right across this council area without the need for latent demand tests. At March 2024, the rural waiting list shows 750 first preference waiting list applicants who require a home in a rural area. 480 of those are in housing stress, and there are only 106 allocations over the past 12 months. So we are seeing that evidence, and that evidence is coming through right across the board for those rural settlements. We are in a pretty good position compared to previous years in that we have one scheme completed in Lisnaskea over the past 12 months for 9 units, and we have 2 schemes on site, McGartland Terrace and Dromore and Grey Hill Meadows and Clabby. But then in the 3-year programme, we also have Lesolven Park and Brookborough, which is one complex needs unit, Main Street, Dromore and Kelly Paddy Road, Lisnaskea. So we have a fairly healthy programme, compared to previous years. But in terms of Newton Butler, Rural Housing Association had identified a site, and and have been working in the background, but are not yet advanced enough to register that for inclusion on the programme. But we'll continue to encourage any housing association to register a site in Newton Butler. The need, the 5-year need is for 9 units, so the evidence is there. It's just a matter of identifying a site, you know, and the right mix. And to be able to
Chair, I appreciate that's a real thing. We walked around Newton Butler and showed at least 10 sites. Now, maybe there's some reasons why, but there's 10 sites for sale. So I just struggle to understand, you know, where that has all fell in the last 3-4 years. Yeah, but I appreciate it, Sinead. Thank you.
In terms of street lighting, the housing executive don't actually provide the street lighting. It's the DFI. So any street lighting issues would be a matter for them.
I appreciate that, Helena. 25 years, I'm well aware of that one, but I mention it in the context of a lot of your tenants.
Yeah, well,
it's predominantly at the back of your tenants' houses.
a lot of those paths would be adopted. So they are at the back of our properties. So they're in our estates. You'll find that a lot of the footpaths and the parking areas are all adopted. We might own the houses and the gardens, but a lot of the ground would be adopted by DFI. I know it can be difficult sometimes to determine who owns what, but if you have any specific addresses you want me to check out, please, you know, send them in to me and I will check to see if the paths are ours or if they're DFI's.
Chair, I'm not contending for 1 minute, Helen, that
I know that.
I like the way people answer questions. I appreciate, I'm not contending for 1 minute here. I'm saying that you have a large number of housing executive tenants who are going to come out the back of their houses and fall and break their neck. Hopefully not to that literal degree, but that they're stumbling around in the dark. And surely there has to be, and I appreciate it's the lighting people that literally do the lights on the DFI pads and all the rest of it. But surely the housing executive have some role there in the health and safety of their own tenants to be able to lobby or at least look to monitor how many claims is going in or do something there to be able, because I would contend that this is going to be a bit like the potholes in the road service, lots of claims going in for people stumbling around in the dark.
We do report an awful lot to the road service and to, you know, any issues with the paths or the lighting and that. We do. Our neighbourhood officers are continually on to road services about lighting and about issues for our tenants, especially our vulnerable older tenants, and we do put forward arguments.
Yeah, but this is a blanket thing where they've taken them out all over the north, and yeah, it's just to say, well, this is wrong. Guys, there has to be some evidence, and use are the guys with the biggest amount of tenants in the one block, as it were, to be able to sort of collate some information to feed back to the departments and stick those lights back in. There's a lot of people. Now, maybe I'm missing my guess, Helen, and everybody has wonderful eyesight and nobody's going to fall over at all. But I would imagine it'll be like the potholes. There should be a lot of things. And I would imagine the housing executive would probably get some sense of before anybody else. Don't know if that could be followed. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Next we go to Councillor Rosemary Barton.
Thank you very much. And thank you again, Grania, for your presentation tonight. And to Helen and your team over the last while when I've been working with you. One particular thing, obviously it's a very much a rural area that I represent, and there are a number of homes in the countryside, perhaps abandoned farmhouses where the elderly people living in them have passed on, etc. And the countryside's become quite littered with these homes, and they're not very pretty to look at either. Is there any way, have you given consideration to any schemes which would maybe encourage the renovation of those homes? For example, a scheme that was happened a number of years ago, and it actually tidied up the countryside quite a lot. And given the shortages that we have of homes, is it something that you would be considering?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, so in principle, there's no reason why as the Strategic Housing Authority, if we were asked by the department to lead out on a programme such as that, there's no reason in principle why we wouldn't be able to do that. If it required a change to our powers, then it's something that we would seek, and if the department asked us to do it, it would be a matter of changing or improving on our powers. We certainly have redevelopment powers, which we apply. We have vesting powers, which we use from time to time. But a kind of a programme of either bringing properties back into use in the countryside, or a programme of demolishing homes in the countryside, whatever the response would be, that definitely would have to be set by the department and identified by the Department for Communities as a policy priority. They would then ask us to do that, and as I say, we would then look at our powers, our levers, and our funding. But as the housing agency, we will do what the department asks us to do. So if that was a priority for either an existing minister or a future minister, there's no reason in principle why we wouldn't be able to do that.
So you couldn't plant the seed in his mind, do it the other way around?
Well, I mean, to answer directly, I mean, we do already. So it's also part of our job to advise. So the forthcoming housing supply strategy, which the minister will launch in the next few weeks, we have included our advice within that, in terms of saying, here's some of the areas you want to look at. We have a very, very proactive rural housing strategy, and within that rural housing strategy is looking at the range of ways in which you can increase supply in the countryside. So yes, I think the answer would be we provide that type of advice to the department.
Okay, thank you. So we can look forward to some news on that, perhaps.
Well, that will definitely be a decision for the minister, I think.
Yeah, right. Thank you. And another thing is, again, it's in relation to OTs and the housing executive working together. I'm not saying there's a disconnect, and I'm not saying that under any terms, but you have someone that's had a stroke, for example, they come to you looking for support for perhaps a wet room. This takes forever and a day to get sorted. There seems to be a total, 18 months, 2 years before there's any progress. Sometimes those people don't have that length of time. They're struggling in relation to hygiene, etc., etc. And that's a terrible length of time. Is there no way this can be shortened or short-circuited in some way between yourselves and the OTs, etc.?
Thank you for the question. I can't tell you how timely this is, because I was in with our team today in our local office, and we had 5 hours talking about housing and health and the relationship between the two. It's just a coincidence that you asked me that question on the day where we literally spent 5 hours on that exact issue. And there's clearly a huge amount that needs to be done in the area of health and housing. And so, we will and want to and will continue to play our part in that. So I think if I start with our role as the landlord, so effectively as a landlord, we are far more in control of this in terms of what we can do for our own tenants than we are for private sector tenants in some respects. However, I suppose the discussion that we had today, which included health colleagues and will continue to include colleagues in health, is, first of all, there is clearly in some cases a significant length of time from the point at which a GP raises a request for an assessment to the point at which an individual or a household receives that occupational therapy assessment. And sometimes that can be months, and sometimes possibly even more than that. So I think that's certainly a challenge, and we're working very closely with health colleagues to see if there's anything that we can do in improving that. But there is also then, once that happens, if it's a housing executive tenant and it's a minor adaptation, we can deliver that through our response maintenance program, and I gave you the numbers on that. And if it's a much bigger adaptation, then that comes to us for our major adaptations. But I'm not going to, I mean, I have to be honest with you, that often takes a long time. But that's on the major adaptation side, that's because of the scale of the work. So it requires, you have to go then from what an OT, what an occupational therapist believes an individual needs is not always what is deliverable. So, if the solution is something that an OT recommends, it won't be until we get our technical teams out to look at it. The adaptation that's needed might not be possible in that property. There might not be enough room. The property itself might not be able to take the adaptation. And then we also have to consider a whole range of all the logistical issues. So we are looking in real terms at everything we can possibly do as a landlord to cut down on the timeframes. There is also a very, very significant challenge for us as a landlord, which is that some of the major adaptation works that are being asked for by occupational therapists in some cases can be more than six-figure sums. So 100, 120, 140,000 on a property that's maybe only has a value of 60, 70, 80,000. Now, that said, that adaptation can be transformational for the health of the household. So it's a very, very big area of focus. There's a big program of work to be done. And that's before I've even touched on private sector adaptations, which is also another area that needs a huge amount of focus. And for the customer, in that instance, then they have to navigate, because they're not a tenant of ours, so they have to navigate working with a contractor and all of the works. And in some of those, in both, for example, there can be high levels of cancellations, for example, in some instances where a household decides we just can't cope with that work. So it's a very, very complicated area. I'm not going to say very much more. I was going to say I could talk all day. We have talked about it all day today. But it is something that I think as our population gets older, as the needs of our tenants and the wider population become more complex, I think you're going to see much, much more focus on it. I'm pleased to say, but I think there are, because it's such a complex area, I think there probably won't be any easy solutions. We take our responsibility very serious as a landlord, so we'll continue to do that. But I agree with you. I think relationship between housing and health is much improved, but I want to see it improving even more. So I know that's a very general answer, but hopefully you can see that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes in terms of improving.
Thank you. And Chair, if you'll allow me, one more question. Also, it's in relation to the portable warmth scheme. Yeah, I've had a number of people that have been disappointed.
Yes.
Clients that have been disappointed in relation to that.
Yeah.
And the final questions for you, Helen. It's in relation to pathway through, it's in relation to an area of Irvinstown I'll speak to you about, but it's in relation to a pathway that needs a handrail, and I'm not sure who owns the land. And I think maybe I sent you an email. I'm not sure if it arrived with you or not, but I'll speak to you again in relation
no,
to.
No, I know what you're speaking about, but
Yeah.
I had replied to that. But I'll
Didn't get, but we'll speak later.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll
Okay.
come back to you about it tomorrow. All right.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, thank you, Rosemary. For those online, I have been taking notes of who came in at various stages. So I'm going to go to Councillor Earl Thompson here in the chamber, and then I'll be taking Debbie, Keith and Josephine online, and then coming back into the chamber again and going back out to Seamus. So you're not being ignored, but I am trying to take it in the order that you got your hands up. So Councillor Earl Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. And first of all, Grania, can I welcome you along here this evening as the Chief Executive. It's not your first time here in Greens, Loma, county town of Tyrone. It's good to have you down. And I know my other colleagues, some of them are coming in there online at the minute, so some of them are going to come in later on matters. I'm going to stick to Oma. Can I first of all thank and commend Helen, her team, and always do this and take this opportunity in doing that, Helen, for you're very helpful. You get a direct answer from Helen, whether it's what you want to hear or not. So I'll just go straight to the point and thank Helen for her directness and her help where she can help you, and to our team for all of that. I welcome, a lot of these things have already been mentioned, but I'm just going to cover them briefly here. I welcome the new housing schemes there, Arbor, and the choice and housing as well. And I welcome the commitment of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to, for the building of these new houses. And you said there's 6 in Belfast. I suppose I'm in sympathy with Councillor Riley. I would like to see that coming across to the west as well. So that'd be good after 26 years of non-build. I think that one of the big issues that we have down here is, it's the same no matter what department you're dealing with, movement of personnel. And we're not saying that people shouldn't be promoted or take retirement or whatever. But sometimes these things, people are moved around and we don't hear about it. And it's when you're dealing with people on the ground on a regular basis, then all of a sudden they're gone. So I'd like an updated list of who we can get in touch with regarding the day-to-day issues that we have to deal with. So if that could be done, and if the presentation itself, Chief Executive, that can be sent out to us, do we get read it more detail of it? I think the issue is here is collaboration and partnership approach across the various areas of the housing executive. As I say, we deal with Helen on a regular basis, but then when you go to something else, it could be more problematic, even as in this area, and it's another office is dealing with. Sometimes it takes forever to get an answer and get people on site to see an issue that needs to be dealt with. Particularly when you're dealing with older people. I stated that I'm one of those myself, but when you're dealing with older people who have maybe disabilities, that becomes a large issue out there with regard to constituents. So I'll just leave those points with you, and if we can get that updated list of when people, the people that we're dealing with, I know patch managers need to move around, but if we can have that updated, that'll be great. Thanks for your time today. Thank you.
You, Councillor Thompson, thank you for those questions, and I'm very lucky to have Helen, I have to say. So thank you for saying what you said. We will. There's no problem at all with an updated list of staff contacts, and I think we have seen. I think since the pandemic, a lot of public sector bodies have seen movement, and I have to say, consider ourselves very lucky. We have, as a housing executive, managed to retain very high levels of colleagues, and I think people are moving around to take opportunities in other teams. And as you can well imagine, some of the jobs that my colleagues do, they're difficult jobs, and people tend to do them for a few years and then they might move to another team just to give themselves maybe a change of pace. By and large, when people join the housing executive, they tend to stay. We're very lucky, very fortunate in that sense. But as a result, we just need to keep our contacts updated. So there's no problem. We can do that. And I am sorry if you're not getting contact at the same pace from other teams. We'll certainly have a look at that, because there shouldn't be that issue at all. Presentation will of course be circulated. I'm sure happy to reach that. Thank you.
Yeah. Next we go to Councillor. Sorry. Next we go to Councillor Josephine Deehan online.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Grania, for your report and for coming down with your team this evening to present your report and to answer our questions. And of course, I echo the comments about Helen and her team and how helpful and responsive they are, often in very tricky and difficult circumstances. They do give off their time very generously. I want to thank the Housing Executive for all the work that they have done in our District Council area. I know that the standard of new builds is exceptionally high, and I know that the tenants who are fortunate enough to avail of these new builds are very happy in general with their accommodation. And Chair, I know that Helen does acknowledge that, you know, there is a very high level of housing need remaining, not least of which is in our District Council area. So I just jotted down some figures here, and I'm glad that we'll have a copy of her report. So 2,154 people on the waiting list. Of those, over 1,500 in acute housing stress. And for the year April 23 to March 24, 210 allocations made, which is just about 10% of those on the waiting list. And then in terms of future housing requirements, an estimated 900 odd over the next 5 years. Now, I know we've had a discussion about latent housing demand and you know, how accurate that is in predicting housing needs. But, you know, I just think that that is too small. And I understand completely that the Housing Executive is limited by their budget. And I'm delighted that they have been able to fund 6 new low carbon houses, which I think are so important, not only in giving tenants warm, comfortable houses, but also in reducing the cost of running these houses. I wanted to ask if going forward, any new builds that the housing executive embark on, will that be to passive house standard or low carbon standard? Secondly, do those building standards apply to housing associations? And also, is there much cost, extra cost involved in producing a low carbon house compared with standard builds? Finally, then, I want to just echo my thoughts on health inequalities and the importance of good quality housing as being a social determinant of health. And I'm sorry that, you know, you haven't got the additional funding from DFC for affordable warmth, because I think that that is really critical. So maybe as a body, we could lobby DFC for more funding for that. And finally then, Chair, in terms of, I see projected spend for next year includes nearly £10 million for planned maintenance and stock improvement, and also nearly £2.5 million for response maintenance. Would that include retrofitting to improve, you know, energy efficiency, or would that just be standard maintenance? So thank you, Chair, and thank you for answering those questions.
Thank you for your questions, Councillor. So if I just go through these one by one. So it's a very, very good question. Will future housing executive homes be built to low carbon standards? I think the best thing I can say there is I would strongly hope that that's the case. We are very strong advocates in the housing executive. You know, any new build that's not as low carbon as possible is a home that you have to retrofit in the early stages of its life. So so it would be my preferred option that we are building to low carbon standards. But I think it may well come down to cost, and the question of, you know, will we build a greater number of homes to with higher levels of carbon emissions, or the opposite. And I think, unfortunately, the question may well come down to cost. But look, these would be good problems to have, and I hope that doesn't sound flippant, but to be in a position whereby we're building will be a very good day. And I suppose, in a way, the answer to the second question flows from that. Do housing executives build to that standard? They currently don't build to passive house standard unless housing associations take that decision themselves to do so. There isn't a requirement for them to do that. So our building regulations don't currently require housing associations to build to that standard. There is an increased amount of grant available to housing associations should they wish to build low carbon homes, and that is available to housing associations, and a number of them have availed of that in recent years. I can't give you the numbers on what's the additional cost, mainly because we're still in the process of looking over the cost of the total build, but there is a significant difference in the cost of what we would call a traditional new build to those low carbon homes we built in Belfast, but also what was unique about them, they weren't just built to passive house standard. We also built them using modern methods of construction. So part of the reason we wanted to do the pilot was to answer your question exactly that. What's the difference in time? What's the difference in approach? Side, yes, the program for this year on planned maintenance does include thermal improvements, and we have just approved a 950 home retrofit program for the forthcoming year. So so some of that 10 million will certainly include thermal improvements and energy efficiency related maintenance, and then in next year's programme we will also have that new retrofit programme as well. So we are focused very, very heavily on energy efficiency, and that's been mandated by our board as well, who are very fully in support of that.
Thank you, Grania.
Thank you. Next we go to Councillor Debbie Coyle online.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Grania, thanks for the presentation, and I'm just gonna I've got a bit of a sore voice, so I'm just going to read out all the points and questions and then if you could answer where they need to be answered, please. We saw on the presentation around supporting people, the money going to them. Does that still include housing for those needing emergency accommodation because of domestic violence and abuse, like with Women's Aid? And are there any plans to increase that, especially considering the recent reports of the high number of victims of domestic violence and abuse? I sit on the Southern Regional Housing Forum, and disabled adaptations and grants is a piece of ongoing work now that we've been working on for well over a year, maybe 2 years even. And the issue continues to be access, or one of the main hold up is the access to occupational therapists. And I'm wondering if there's anything, you know, coming up around that. Also, like Rosemary, I wondered if there are any schemes where you can buy or purchase private or take over private properties or whatever, and bring them into, do them up and bring them into social housing to help with the housing need. And sorry if I missed it, but if there was anything on it, but I'm wondering the plans around the social need of single people who are just not getting into a relationship. So young people going into their 20s and 30s that are literally living at home with mum or dad working, and you know there's no social housing available for them, and properties are too expensive. And also couples where their children are grown up and they genuinely want to downgrade into a 1 or 2 bedroom house or apartment. Is there any plans for some smaller accommodation going forward? And I just wanted to commend the supporting community staff and their support, the local community groups and Helen and her team, because, you know, people working on the ground in communities and in the area that I do that in Enniskillen and the places that I visit in my council area, especially in Irvinstown, you know, they work so hard to support the communities and local people. And the patch managers who deal sometimes with totally unacceptable antisocial behaviour, you know, they cannot, you know, they're on the front line a lot of the time, you know, so I just want to give them a big thanks really, because they're the in between, you know, the tenant and the rest of the community, because most social housing areas are all mixed anyway. Like her, I like to have an update on the patch managers for each area, because I know that there have been some changes recently, and I'm just glad to hear that connection between health and housing, because I think from the Regional Housing Forum, I think that it's quite clear that that needs to be done, you know, that connection between health and housing as well. So that's it really. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Yes, so in terms of supporting people, yes, I mean, the Housing Executive still remains the largest provider of funding for services for women, mainly women, obviously, and children fleeing domestic violence or abuse, and families fleeing domestic violence or abuse. So we still provide funding through the Supporting People programme for accommodation-based services there. The total overall budget for supporting people at a regional level, at a Northern Ireland-wide level last year was increased. Minister Lyons made that a priority of his, and that has enabled us to fund, I suppose, to give an uplift to those organisations that we support, which I know was very, very welcome, given I suppose, the pressure on budgets for those organisations. And I'm very conscious that the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy has now been launched, and that we play a really, really key part in that. So that will continue to be a major priority. On disabled adaptations and grants, as I said, and as had been said following the previous question, it is a real area of focus. We will be taking forward a significant programme of work in relation to this. And as I say, today was a really important day actually for us, and just kind of working our way through the various different work streams in relation to that. I do agree access to OTs is clearly a challenge. We will work closely, and we continue to do, and anything we can do to help and assist health colleagues to improve access to OTs, or indeed to just through the process to reduce down the length of time, we certainly will do. We set a target last year for our own process. So in other words, the length of days that an applicant through our grants, our private sector grants team, from end to end, we set ourselves a target which we exceeded. I wish I could remember the numbers. I apologise to my grants colleagues online that I can't, but I'm very happy to follow up. But certainly the target that we set for ourselves to reduce the number of days in relation to grants was exceeded, and we will continue to work to better that. But that's really about looking through the process from end to end and putting the customer at the heart of it and seeing what can we do at every possible point to reduce the length for the customer, the length of time it takes. And we continue to focus on that. Yes, I mean, you asked a question about private properties. We do have a business case with the Department for Communities right now where we have proposed that we should be allowed to acquire properties in the private sector on the open market, which we would then use in the short term for temporary accommodation. And if that business case is approved, that would be, again, we've talked a lot about the housing executive's powers and abilities tonight, but that would be an additional lever that we could use to increase our stock of temporary accommodation, and we would hope reduce the amount of hotels that we're using. We would acquire those for temporary accommodation for a few years with the aim that we would then flip them. They would then become general needs accommodation. So that's a really important principle. I'm hoping, provided you invite me back next year, that I'm able to say we've now had that power and we've been out there acquiring properties. So that really would make a difference in the short to medium term. In terms of the needs of single people and young people, we're very shortly going to launch our strategy in relation to young people and homelessness, with a view to preventing homelessness for young people. And obviously I suppose the importance of rent deposit schemes here can't be overstated. For many young people who need to access the private rented sector, one of the biggest barriers is a rent deposit, and being able to access that. We also spoke today about that issue of downsizing and how we as a landlord can better, I suppose, rationalise, that's the wrong word, but I'll use it anyway because at the end of the day, but better rationalise our stock, but basically enable better churn throughout our stock so the right people are in the right homes and their needs are being met. If you're in a home that's too big for you, it simply costs you too much, and we have tenants who are in homes and not using all of their rooms, and we'd like to be able to assist them where we can and appropriately to find smaller homes and free those homes up for larger families. So there's a piece of work that we need to do there and do it appropriately and with care, as other landlords have done. And I suppose my final point, just to reiterate the point that you make around supporting communities, which is a hugely important organisation, very important partner of ours, and working with us to involve tenants and housing executive tenants in our services and in how we design services. And I think the work that the Housing Community Network has done on disabled adaptations has been hugely helpful to us, again, in that point around reducing the length of time it takes us to undertake or to assess grants and for grants to be delivered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grania. Next we'll go to Councillor Keith Elliott online.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Also, I'd like to thank Grania and Helen and the team for the presentation this evening, and also Helen and her team in the Enniskillen office for their attentiveness when we need them for issues. Obviously, I'd like to talk about this sort of the number on the waiting lists. And I know for Melanoma, I think it was mentioned now, if I pick this up right, was it 200 new builds or houses coming into work? But is that over a 5-year period? Did I pick that up right? Was it on the second slide? Maybe could.
Yes, thank you. So yes, so for the next 5 years, 905 new social housing units are needed across the council area. Yes. But we have currently 285 on the programme. So that's, in other words, sites that or units that are we've already been, discussing with housing associations. Housing associations themselves have taken that work forward. So in other words, units that we expect to go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously, there'll be a lot of people sitting on them waiting lists that'll probably never see social housing, because with people being at it all the time, people in need, maybe more need and things like that. And obviously going forward with a number of houses proposed to be built. I know I've emailed Helen a number of times about this, there's a site in Enniskillen, the old Grosvenor Barracks site. And that's on the agenda for social housing now, as long as I can remember. I think it could be 10 years or more, maybe longer. And I know that the housing executive that won't be building them as such. But with regard to the, I use pushing forward with those sort of sites, because it's sitting there proposal for, was it 200 houses, for 200 social houses, and it seems to be going nowhere. Have you any say or any push that can be put onto that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll ask Sinead to come in on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're working with DFC. We're on the steering group for Grosvenor Barracks. DFC have to go in to renew their planning permission for the 200 homes, but they're currently in the process of developing the development brief to take forward the delivery of that. We have supported 60 of the units, of the 200 units, to be delivered as social, and they've been included on the 3-year programme in 2 phases, across 2 phases. So we'll continue to push on with that, and yeah, it's a very important part of the delivery that we anticipate for Enniskillen.
So really, I know you can't say for definite when this is going to happen. Are we going to have to wait another 10 years, do you think, for this to come to a head, sort of thing, that these houses are built? Because as I can see, yes, I know there has been houses built on the Sligo Road and will come into play very shortly, I would imagine, and that's to be welcomed. But with regard to all these people that's on waiting lists, and I know that as one comes off it, somebody else goes on. But as time goes on, as I said before, there'll be people that will never see a house. Councillor Coyle stated about single people still living at home, and that's perfect example. Well, they'll have to stay at home because they won't. There's always somebody in a greater need. So as I say, anything that can be done to sort of push forward on sites like Grosvenor Barracks, I think it's very important that it is pushed ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Then we come back to Councillor Stephen Donnelly in the chamber.
Thank you very much, Chair, and can I thank the whole team for the presentation. It's been some very useful information brought forward thus far. I suppose returning to the issue of accommodation for those who are in situations of domestic abuse, sexual abuse, and situations of that nature. The figures that I have before me suggest that within housing executive stock, there's somewhere in the region of 9 units within Fermanagh Noma dealing with those particular situations when they arise. I presume that whenever you referred to the additional funding that was brought forward for supporting communities, that's not just helping with those kind of accommodations, but that's engaging with external providers who would have their own stock that would be helping with women and children who find themselves in those difficult situations. I suppose the question that I would pose at this stage, just given that obviously you have a number of different providers working across and in collaboration to deal with women and children who end up in those very difficult situations, is do we have an understanding at this stage in terms of the mismatch between supply and demand? Because certainly I do get contacted reasonably regularly, actually, by people who do find themselves in a situation where there either isn't availability or what is available is incompatible with the needs of their family at that stage, in terms of perhaps their children have got educational needs and they're being sent far too away to be able to accommodate that. So further information in that regard would be useful. And secondly, in terms of the broader mismatch between the housing demand and the actual supply that exists, I would reinforce what has been said in terms of the fact that there is an increasing element and generation of young people who are essentially being forced into the box bedroom in their family homes on account of the fact that the housing supply traditionally has been aimed more towards larger families for understandable reasons, but it has created a difficult situation where a large number of young people, particularly in single situations, where they just quite simply do not have the financial resource to be able to access what's currently on the market. And I appreciate the response you gave in terms of the need to make sure that the existing housing stock is being used to the maximum utility. But I think the problem that I've identified within conversations about this is that I think there's been a nervousness previously around developing smaller housing stock, because I think there's been a recognition that people's situations can be quite fluid and that they will eventually become couples, or they will eventually have children. And therefore, there's a bit of an inbuilt bias towards the development of large housing. And whilst that's not an unreasonable assumption to work with, but I think there is a significant downfall, and that we can see how that's played out in the sense that you do have a significant number of young people in their mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s who are essentially locked out of the housing market. And I think that that does need to be factored into any future new builds that are being considered in the Oma area, and indeed right across from Ananoma. And I suppose, Chair, the final point that I would just make in terms of that mismatch, one of the things that we do regularly hear about is concerns from those working within the disability sector around the appropriateness of housing that is available for those with disabilities who do wish to live an independent lifestyle, but they need to be supported to be able to do that. And I think that there does have to be, in any new housing that does come forward, an element that does recognise that particular challenge, and having from the outset co-design to ensure that actually that there is an element that matches the needs of those with physical disabilities within Fermanagh and Oma. And I know that that's something that's particularly relevant to Oma, just given significant levels of health inequality and deprivation and levels of disability. And I know that that's something that would be very much appreciated, that could be taken into account in any future decision making and allocation. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I think so much of what you talked about is in relation to housing and support and linking housing and support. So yes, I mean, the supporting people budget is a really, really welcome and a really, really important budget for, you know, as I say, giving people the support that they need to stay in a home, and whether it's women and children who've been impacted by domestic abuse, right through to somebody with a disability and older people and so on. It is really, really, it's a really important programme. We couldn't be without it, quite frankly. We did undertake a needs assessment. Now, it's a number of years ago. I think it was in 2021 when we published it. And that found a 14% gap between demand for supporting people services and supply. I would expect that would have gone up, because that was back in 2021, which feels like a lifetime ago. You wouldn't have seen the impact of the pandemic, for example, in that research. So I think we know already there's a gap there. And I think what I would also be very open about is the fact that when we provide and when we fund services through supporting people, it is dependent on the voluntary community sector partners that are there locally. So I know, for example, in rural areas, there's a challenge in some rural areas, and an inability to be able to provide those services if there simply aren't the service providers there. So that's probably something that we constantly look at and struggle to ensure and have to make sure that we're meeting need in the delivery of that programme. So I take those points absolutely and seriously. On the point about young people and the balance, I mean, I'm sure Sinead will want to come in, but we do undertake our needs assessment is sophisticated enough for us to be able to understand I suppose the nature of housing need, those properties, those households, either single person households or small families. So we break down in our needs assessment the nature of that need. And when we're advising both housing associations and indeed planning authorities, we are robust in our advice in terms of making sure that you get the balance and the mix right. And we often will withhold our support for a scheme if we feel the balance is not right and there isn't a good mix. And so Sinead, I'm happy, it might be helpful if you want to come in on that point. Yeah.
Just the mic, Chair. Sorry.
If you just lean forward a wee bit into your mic, thank you.
It's not live, Chair.
All right, hold on. Yeah, there we go.
Right, okay, sorry. And we'll work closely with our housing association colleagues to achieve a balanced mix of house types to reflect the profile of the waiting list. There's 51% of the applicants in the waiting list are single, and 21% are small families. So there is, an evidence of a need for small unit accommodation. There's also evidence for wheelchair accessible accommodation. In fact, we've identified that over the next 5 years, there's a need for 30 wheelchair units across the district. We've currently got 13 wheelchair units on site and 9 are included in the programme. So we do actively work with associations to include roughly a 10% of accessible units within the programme. But we'll keep an eye to that. We'll work with associations. We ensure that when in our discussions that the mix of the units supported is as important as the number of units supported. And we'll have to keep an eye to that and keep reviewing the waiting list every year to make sure that we achieve the balance that that is required to make that change in household profile, essentially.
Thank you. Next we go to Councillor Seamus Green online.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for coming. Just a couple of things. I suppose the first is more of an observation. Every year or every time we meet, the Housing Executive, Ida Wallace, a bit like Councillor O'Reilly, criticised the latent demand test, and I know maybe you have little influence on how that's put out, but my thoughts on it always was, in a rural community like mine, we had a latent demand test twice, and we filled the local community hall with people. I think something like 40 or 50 people signed up each time that they were looking for houses to be built in the local community, and each time it came back, there was no demand. Which was really frustrating and put people off ever even attempting to do anything like it again. And it seemed to be basically you almost had to be homeless to get enough points on it. But there was numerous people that what we were told was that the likes of Enniskillen and maybe Oma and Listonskea, Irvinson, that's where the need was. But we had numerous people signed up that were living in housing executive houses in them areas that were mad to move back to the rural community, and which surely would have freed up a house where there was need. So the fact of not building them in the local community, rural community where there were where people wanted to move, it would have been the same as building a house in Enniskillen, because the person was wanting to move from that house, freeing it up then for the housing exec. But anyway, I don't particularly want to comment on that because I mentioned it that often. I don't think anything's ever going to change on it. I suppose the other thing that I do want an answer on is the affordable warmth scheme. A few people has contacted me that has borners that are nearly 20 years of age, and they qualify under with the income threshold. But the fact that 16, 17, 18, 19 years ago, they actually put in wood chip boilers, they are now excluded from being funded on getting the boiler done. And there's some of these people that the burner is completely done, won't work, and they're sitting in a freezing house and they can't afford to put in a new boiler, and they don't qualify because the wood chip burner doesn't qualify. Can anyone explain to me the sense in that, so that people that had forethought maybe 15, 20 years ago of putting in these wood chip burners now are disqualified from getting them any grant help to renew them?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I'm going to ask my colleague Kevin, I think, who's online. Hope, he heard the question in relation to wood chip boilers. If he could answer that for me, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi Seamus, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to talk, and thank the council and Grania for giving me the opportunity to talk. Just introduce myself because this is the first time ever I have had the opportunity to attend a HIP meeting. My name is Kevin Lees. I'm the recently appointed head of grants for West Grants. And I suppose I'll touch on your point first about the wood chip boilers. I understand that wood chip boilers were not included in the scheme, but Seamus, what I would say is if you have any individual or schemes or cases where you have a constituent who would qualify under the less than £23,000 income, and there's no heating in the property, it's a case that we would take to our central improvement and development team to establish if in those circumstances and that there's no heat source within the property, that we can consider that. Albeit functioning wood chip boilers aren't included in the scheme at the minute, but like you were describing there, where these boilers are over 20 years old and are totally not functioning at all, and people are sitting with no heat. If you wouldn't mind, give me a call to the end of the office. We look at those on an individual basis, if that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful. I suppose could maybe you're not able to say what the thinking was of excluding them in the first place. It really seems an odd thing to do, that people that did go down the route of renewable energy sources are now being penalised and excluded then from the affordable warmth scheme.
Unfortunately, Seamus, I couldn't answer that question. I'll have to feed back to our Central Improvement and Development team to find out where the original rationale came from for the wood chip boilers being excluded from the scheme. But I will definitely get back to you on that.
Well, just finally on that, Gavin, I rang the local office, I think must be near 2 months ago, and then I contacted the ones you're after mentioned there, and they were to get back to me, and I've never heard a dicky board since from them. So maybe with a little prompt from you might be able to get them to answer that question, because it really does seem quite discrimination against people that has these. Like, you know, it's a really odd thing that has happened, you know, and I would love to see the explanation on it.
Well, I would definitely agree. If anybody is sitting without any heat on their property, I'll definitely feed back with you, and maybe we'll pick up some of the addresses that you may have had constituents or contact you about. I'll feed back to our central team, and I'll definitely get you an answer as quickly as possible and circulate it around the council.
Thank you, Kim.
That's okay. And just there was whilst I'm on there, there was just one other wee point there that probably, I think it was Debbie, Councillor Coyle, you had raised about the timelines in relation to the working with OTs and the housing executive in relation to the disabled facilities grants. I know, Grania, you were talking about the timelines in which we have control. So essentially within the grants department, and I know there's different tenures for what people would describe as disabled facilities grants and major adaptations. I represent the private sector within the housing executive and private grants. But the timeline that we were aiming towards was 284 days within which we have control of the grants. Essentially, they're because of the way that grants work, and people who own their own properties, they endeavour to get their own statutory authorities and contractors and architects. So we look at different stages that we have control of, and I'm happy to say that in West Grants we're now turning around grants in 120 days for the schemes that we have, or for the areas that we have control of, albeit that we don't have control of some functions like building control and planning and build over sewers from NI Water. I know our colleagues in the social sector too have those similar issues. But again, if anybody would like to give me a wee call, me and my team would be very happy to give advice even before you have specific queries in relation to individual cases, because we're kind of very niche market within the housing executive, and that we deal in my team with disabled facilities grants and other grants. One other wee point that I picked up on with, if Grania doesn't mind me continuing to give my perspective on things, a few councillors have asked about potentially bringing properties into vacant properties and derelict properties back into use from a private perspective. And I know that in the Republic there's vacant property refurbishment grants and derelict property top-up grants. Unfortunately, we don't have that here. And in the past, we would have had discretionary grant aid for bringing for renovation and replacement type grants. Unfortunately, with the funding being as it is, we don't have that that funding stream any longer for private properties. But hopefully, in the future, there will be funding from the department for discretionary grants again in the future. That's just a few wee things that I'd like to pick up on. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Kevin. Finally, we go to Councillor Dermot Brown in the chamber. Thank you, Dermot. What better to turn your light on?
Thank you, Chair. Just to start off, again, I suppose, by commending the good work that's going on and the responsiveness from yourselves and the other staff is very good, I have to say. So I just I've got three areas really. I suppose the first one is, you know, we had an update on the screen there that said that there was 21 homes delivered, social homes delivered this year, and that there was in the pipeline another 120 or 40, can't remember, but are in that ballpark, which is obviously not enough, but it's progress of a kind. But I would like to know maybe what is the figure for the number of homes that have been sold under the right to buy scheme over this last year? Because I make that point, if we're selling more homes than we're building, then we're not replenishing the social housing stock and we're just chipping away at it. And that has been happening for a long, long time now since that scheme. So I would have concerns about that right to buy scheme and its future, and if we have a housing crisis and we're trying to build more homes, I don't see how that can stay. So I'll maybe give a bit of a thought on that, please. Next point then, I suppose we have an update there saying that there's more people now living in non-standard temporary accommodation like hotels and B&Bs. Which is disappointing. It's obviously a very, very traumatic thing for anyone to have to find themselves homeless, but then not being housed either, and being housed in hotels, and the hotel is not fit for any human living on a long-term basis. And I remember working with a man who was in a hotel for nearly a year, and it was, you know, you can imagine the impact that would have on somebody's mental health, physical health, and all the rest of it. So what are the sort of numbers of people, say, on an average week that are in hotels and B&Bs? And what sort of, you were talking there about supporting people, what is the sort of wraparound support that people can get? Because it's obviously, it's not just housing needs, there's emotional needs, financial needs, welfare needs. So if you get a bit of an update on that. And just the final point then is around, we have a housing development being built in Enniskillen at the minute. That's good, but we have two other ones which are delayed and stalled. Councillor Elliott talked about the Grosvenor Barracks one. Seems to be no progress there at all for a long, long time. And from the update tonight, it doesn't seem to be going much further either. And just if you could maybe give a bit of an update on the Cornergrade Road scheme. I know these developments are in the housing plan, and we're being told that these are going to be delivered, but we're just waiting, and this waiting is never ever going to stop, it looks like. So thanks for that, and if you could give some answers there, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. So yes, in terms of this council area, the housing executive sold 22 properties last year, and I suppose just to be clear, it's been the view of the board of the housing executive for some time now that the house sales scheme should be paused or ended. simply because of the scale and the nature of housing need. And as a landlord of 83,000 homes, our focus has to be on and is on new build, and we want it to be on new build. We want to be adding to our stock and meeting housing need and moving people off the waiting list. And as I say, house sales are a problem for us. I think just to add, this is the first year in which the receipts from house sales will not be returned to the housing executive. So not only are we selling our stock, and we're required to do so, we must sell it at a discount. And then the money that is generated from that sale of that discounted home doesn't remain with us as the landlord. It's gone back to, as I say, the department can retain that receipt. So that's the first year in which that's happened, and that will have a material impact on our balance sheet in the future. And so that's very disappointing to us. I hope that will change in time. We've certainly made, I mean, as I say, it's not for me to speak on behalf of the board at all, but I know certainly the board of the housing executive has made that clear to the department that we would like that the house sale scheme to be ceased, and it has been ceased for housing association properties. Just to give you as much assurance as I possibly can on hotel and bed and breakfast accommodation, there is, I think it's fair to say, nobody in the housing executive that believes it's acceptable to place someone in a hotel or a bed and breakfast for and so from our point of view, this is only a relatively recent occurrence. So up to relatively recently in pre-COVID, it was very rare for us to have to do that. We had sufficient temporary accommodation. The number of placements in temporary accommodation since the pandemic have grown from 3,000 placements a year, so this is the Northern Ireland-wide figure, to 11,000 placements. So the demand for temporary accommodation, and that's a number, we often talk about the long kind of health impact of the pandemic. I use that figure just to underscore the housing impact of the pandemic. And so thousands of people who needed temporary accommodation rightly came forward. And so the number of placements increased. So that is a really, really large increase. So we are working really, really hard to lease as much temporary accommodation as we can, as in single let, so people have their own front door. And even though that's not a secure tenancy, it's not a long-term tenancy, it's still significantly better than hotel accommodation. So we had 80 placements last year to non-standard accommodation, so to hotels, and their placements, and some of those may be repeat placements, so 80 over the course of the whole year, which is higher than we would want it to be, but in terms of the total number of households that are experiencing homelessness, it is a very, very, very small proportion. Nevertheless, for the individual impacted by that, that will have had material impact. And I know Helen and the team locally work really, really hard to find solutions very, very quickly for those households. I suppose the final point then in relation to sites, and I think it maybe brings us right back to the start. There's no doubt, and I've presented now, or will have presented to all 11 councils. The housing executive we will do everything we possibly can to push sites forward. In the sites that you've talked about, and I don't know the specifics, we won't be the landowner. We would have to, or we won't be, we're either not the landlord owner or we're not the housing association. So everything that we can do to move things along, either through our own commissioning process, the prospectus that I talked about that we publish, we will do. And I understand the frustration when sites that, individual members or collectively councils have identified as meeting housing need are not moving forward enough. But certainly we will, everything that we could certainly do as the housing authority to push those forward. But as I think we've probably all said enough tonight, the fact that we're not building again means that we are only just one enabler in the process rather than building ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Anthony Feely.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks to Grania and the team for coming here this evening to discuss these problems with us. And I'll be brief. For a lot of the questions I had, my two colleagues, Seamus and Thomas, has covered them. I took the easy option here, just sat here and let them ask them, and I listened to the answers of them. But I share the exact same concerns as Thomas and Seamus, and would be very concerned with the latent demand as well. As being another rural councillor, I was also, like Seamus, been contacted people about the affordable heat scheme and about stoves and that there. So when we are giving out the list of numbers after, I forgot the man's name that was talking, the head of grants, or like his contact as well. I could contact him as well. So when we're giving that out. And another major issue is for building housing in the rural area is the with NA water, with the sewage capacity and all that. I was just wondering, does housing sector be in conversations with NA Water as well, for that is a major problem in rural areas as well? Just comment that, and thanks for the answer so far.
Thank you for those questions. So yes, I'm sure Kevin won't mind making himself available in relation to grants. In terms of the issue of Northern Ireland Water, yes, I mean we are acutely aware of the challenges in relation to wastewater infrastructure, and it is having an impact. There's no doubt on both on individual schemes, but also on build over agreements in relation to adaptation. So coming back to the point around adaptation, so it's having an impact in relation to both. But in relation to new builds specifically, yes, we work very closely with Northern Ireland Water. Our teams this year, when we put together, so every year we do a risk assessment of all of the schemes on the programme. And so this year we've been working with Northern Ireland Water to understand the level of risk to each individual scheme. So we've gone down to a very granular detail. I actually have a meeting coming up, myself and the chair of the Housing Executive, with the chief executive, the chair of Northern Ireland Water. And I suppose we are all exercised by the potential implications for a new build if our wastewater infrastructure continues to be constrained. I suppose what I would say though is, just based purely on Northern Ireland Water figures, Northern Ireland Water is of the view that 18,000 homes can go ahead with a design solution. So on a scheme by scheme basis, finding a design solution, and 19,000 homes are no longer able to go ahead. Okay. So I suppose my view of that is, well, let's start with the 18,000, because that's a lot of housing and that can go quite some way to meeting housing need. And I suppose from my point of view, that's not a reason not to fund the new build programme. So while I fully appreciate and understand wastewater constraints are having an impact, nevertheless, we must move as fast as we possibly can, as many of you have said, to bring schemes forward. So we're looking at this on a scheme by scheme basis. We have regular meetings with Northern Ireland Water colleagues. We'll continue to do that, and then we'll raise the strategic issues at a more senior level. So thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Finally, it gets to me. I've one question. I think, Kevin, you might be the appropriate person for this. Kevin, I had somebody approach me then, and they're looking to do modifications under the disabled grant scheme, and they're having trouble getting an architect, and all of the reasons given for delays seem to apply on this one, and the architects are simply saying there's not enough money in it for them. So basically, is there going to be an uplift? And they're saying also the constraints around the grant aid and what building costs are now, that they simply can't work to those constraints either. So have you any points of discussion on that?
Thank you very much for the question. In relation to architects, if people are finding it difficult to get architects, for good governance, we can't suggest architects' names, particular architects' names, but what we can do is we can refer people to the home improvement agencies. In this case, well, there's two, there's Radius and Gable. If, again, you want to make contact with me, if it's a specific case, we can put you in touch with the home improvement agencies who can give the names of architects and contractors in relation to providing that service. We have recently increased the fees for architects, but there is constraints in relation to the amount of professional indemnity insurance that they have. So again, if you do want to make contact with me, I can give you the specifics on the funding for architects and contractors in relation to the most recent uplifts, because we have had uplifts in successive years for the cost of increased labour and materials, and also for architects' fees and other engineers' fees and that. So again, if you would like to give me a wee call, I'll put my name out there and number. Again, my name is Kevin Lees, and I'll make contact. Just I don't see the name there, and I'll give you a call myself. What's the name?
I'm John McLaughlin, Councillor John McLaughlin. I'm the chair at the moment.
Oh, chair.
That's why you're not seeing me.
All right.
Okay.
No, that's great. I'll make contact and give you some
brilliant.
information on that.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
No problem. Okay.
So I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so I'm going to thank Grania and her team, John, Helen and Sinead here in the chamber, Andy, Mark, Mona and Kevin online for meeting with us tonight and keeping us appraised of the ongoing problems within the housing executive and how they can address the needs of our community. I'm not going to be rude to them, but I have some correspondence, and I think we need to go into confidential. So I'm going to throw them out of the chamber now. So thank you very much. So if you bear with me, councillors, I think it's worth a while to stay on. If any of you are thinking of disappearing quickly, and if we wait to allow our colleagues from the House Executives to leave, then we will go into confidential. So thank you. So so we're at the correspondence stage, and I'm going to ask for somebody to propose we go into committee. Councillor Tommy Maguire and Councillor Earl Thompson. Thank you. we're ready to go. Yeah, so we're just going to ask the Chief Executive to sum up.
Thank you, Chair. While in committee, the Council considered confidential correspondence and agreed a course of action and a series of recommendations for onward reporting to the December Regeneration and Community Committee.
So, proposer and a seconder. Councillor Thomas Maguire and Councillor Earl Thompson. Thank you very much. I wasn't notified of any other business, and unless I've missed somebody somewhere along the lines. Thank you very much, everybody, and safe home.